questions to the Premier. Speaker, every day the real cost of this Liberal government's scandals, waste and mismanagement is being felt by Ontario's families and seniors. Money that should be invested in frontline health care is instead being spent on cancelled gas plants. In order to pay for their scandals and waste, this government has cut $815 million from physician services, 50 medical residency spots, and $50 million in seniors physiotherapy services. These cuts mean that patients are not receiving the quality health care they deserve. Mr. Speaker, will Thursday's budget properly fund health care in Ontario, and will there be more cuts?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I know that the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care is eager to chime in on the supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Healthcare is a priority for our government, Mr. Speaker. It has been and will continue to be. Since 2003, hospital funding in Ontario has risen from $11.3 billion to $17.3 billion, Mr. Speaker. That's a 53% increase. We're investing $11 billion to expand, renew and modernize hospitals, Mr. Speaker, so those are capital dollars to build up the hospital system, Mr. Speaker. We're increasing our investments in home care by 5%, which will, those investments will grow by over $750 million over the next 2 years. Funding for community supports increased to almost $514 million this year, Mr. Speaker. That's an increase of $41.9 million over the last year. Mr. Speaker, in every aspect of health care, funding has gone up. We understand it's a priority. We will continue those increases, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, back to the Premier. In addition to the $815 million cut from physician services, this government cut $54 million from the health care budget last year, despite a 6% increase in the federal government's health transfer. Because of that cut, and cuts to physiotherapy and eye care, Ontario patients are suffering, and it will only get worse. This Liberal government is so out of touch, they refuse to admit their cuts are forcing doctors to close practices and forcing hospitals to fire nurses. Mr. Speaker, when will this government put patients first? Will Thursday's budget reverse the cuts to doctors, nurses and hospitals?
Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know how an increase in our budget for health care, an increase in the budget for our physicians, how that can be somehow at all translated into the sorts of cuts that the member opposite has alluded to. In fact, Mr. Speaker, with regards to our doctors, we had a year of negotiations that led, unfortunately, to no agreement, but we brought in an umpire, a third-party adjudicator, that gave us the best recommendations and implored the OMA to accept what he viewed as a fair offer by the government of that time. Unfortunately, the OMA did not accept his recommendation, retired Judge Winkler's recommendation, and we had to make some changes in order to put patients first, in order to invest an additional $250 million in home care, in order to invest more in mental health services, $138 million of new money over the next 3 years. Those are investments that are important to Ontarians. Notwithstanding that, Mr. Speaker, our doctors are the best paid in Canada.
Yes. Thank you. Final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back again to the Premier. Premier, when you cut frontline health care professionals, you're cutting patients' quality and access to health care. I wish you'd get that right. Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government continues to spew out their fictional figures, and the numbers just don't lie. I'll give you some. 10 nurses were cut at Almont General Hospital, 17 nurses cut at South Lake Regional Health Care, 20 full-time positions gone in Aurelia Soldiers, 33 job cuts at Cambridge Memorial, and 350 full-time positions gone in the riding of Nipissing at the North Bay Regional Hospital. All of these cuts were done in the last year alone. Each cut translates into reduced health care for Ontario's patients. Mr. Speaker, when will it stop? Why won't this government put patients first? Stop and reverse the cuts.
My question is to the Premier. Liberal scandal, waste and mismanagement are having a real impact on the services families deserve. During pre-budget consultations, Ken Loenza Sr., a former union president, said the following: government has a role to provide some humanity, some moral responsibility, some ethical standards to those that we care for. If we can't take care of seniors and our most disabled, then the reality is we're not meeting our moral compass. And I believe he is right. If the Liberals had a moral compass, this Thursday's budget would reverse the cuts to doctors, nurses and hospitals. Mr. Speaker, will this government stop their health care cuts and take care of seniors and our most vulnerable?
Okay, Premier.
But the reality is, since the start of 2015, more than 1,200 nurses have been handed a pink slip by this Liberal government. No matter what rhetoric this Premier wants to spread, the reality is hospitals have been frozen and nurses are being fired and patients are not getting
Come to order, please.
Patients are not getting the kind of care and the kind of response that they deserve at our hospitals. That's the bottom line, Speaker. So, if this Premier is so committed to protecting health care, which hospitals are a part of, I might add, Speaker, will she put an end to the frontline cuts in our health care system?
Thank you, Premier.
I don't know what's so hard to understand. Last year in Dufferin County there were 5 labs. Now there are 2. A 73-year-old constituent now has to travel 30 minutes each way and wait in a line outside in January because the lab in her hometown has been shut down. The only remaining lab in Orangeville was closed between Christmas and New Year's. This is completely unacceptable. Will the minister restore funding to physician services in the upcoming budget so patients in my riding can receive lab services they need without having to stand outside?
Thank you.
Minister, what Dana wants and what patients across this province wants is when they're sitting across from the surgeon who says, you need surgery, you need it quickly, they want to know at the end of the day it's going to be done. But the system, the way it runs as a result of your flatlining the budgets in hospitals across this province, the doctors are saying even though this is surgery that needs to be done in a pressing way, it's not only been pushed back 5 or 6 months. When Dana called the hospital again on February 8th, a week later, he was told, well, now the lineup is going to be 6 to 9 months. Wow. Imagine what this man feels like. He's one constituent, one patient in the province of Ontario who happens to have brought his case into my office. There are many, many more. We need to know from you now, Minister, are you going to make sure people like this don't have to wait extraordinary amount of times in order to be able to get surgery that is life-threatening?
Thank you. Minister. The member for Whitby, Oshawa.
My man. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. It's an absolute honour and pleasure to have been elected to represent the people of Whitby, Oshawa.
Hear, 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 hear.
They sent me to Queen's Park with a clear mandate, and they've asked me to hold the government to account for their cuts to health care in Durham Region in particular. Under the Liberals' watch, Ontario Shore Centre for Mental Health has had 56 jobs cut, Mr. Speaker, 56 jobs cut. There are much-needed nurse positions that have led to wait times up to a year in duration. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier reverse the health cuts in Durham Region, and will she give my constituents the health care system they deserve?
Question. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Premier.
Long-term care.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question. Ontario Shores provides excellent mental health services to many, many Ontarians from across this province, and I know that access to mental health services is important as well to the residents of Whitby, Oshawa. And I will fight, Mr. Speaker, to continue to ensure that they have access to these crucial services. What the member forgot to mention, again, the opposition talks about job loss. Often job changes occur, and because of our relationship with organized labor, we have to lay people off, even in some circumstances when they're just moving to another part of the hospital or they're moving into another program within the hospital. The member opposite, I'm sure he knows, although he didn't perhaps have time to mention, that the changes, which are very well thought about Ontario Shores, also mean that 33 new positions will be created, Mr. Speaker, many of those available to the individuals that he referenced.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier. With this government's cuts to health care, Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Science is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? Concerned Ontario doctors showed up in Whitby, Oshawa to send the Liberals a strong message, and we've listened. The government's cuts, Mr. Speaker, are forcing physicians to reduce their office hours. and to lay off or reduce staff hours. We know a family doctor in Durham Region that had to reduce office hours that has now affected 500 patients. Mr. Speaker, how does the Premier explain to those patients why they can't get a doctor's appointment?
Be seated, please.